What's good, beautiful people? It's your boy Corey Mose with the fresh face. Shout out, fresh out the chair. Yeah, we back with another episode of Mose Knows, and I got the two heavy hitters with me today. Yeah, 24/7 Sports, Eric Henry, and of course on Texas football, CJ Vogel. Two guys, man. How y'all feeling? How y'all living? How's everything going? I'm glad y'all survived this snowpocalypse.
It's lovely out here, man. It's just trying to stay warm, trying to do the best I can. I'm sure CJ, being a Texan, a little more used to this cold weather than I am, but me being shot out of Florida, but we're here, we're surviving.
No, anytime these ice storms come, you're never prepared, right? And I mean, it's just how long can you actually stay inside without going crazy? So I'm doing okay for now. If it goes any longer, we might be in trouble.
CJ, did I see you had like a 5 TV setup? Am I tripping?
We got 4 downstairs. And that's,
4.
Why go anywhere else if that's what the living room's looking like?
Okay, so what's on the big TV and what's on like the smallest TV?
We'll put whatever the big college basketball game is on. Of course,
Okay.
Football's kind of winding down, but now it's the Aussie Open has to find one of these.
Aussie Open.
All
Okay.
about tennis. Tennis is back.
You a tennis guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I dabble. He said I dabble. Eric, you watch tennis?
Bro, I if there's like a premier matchup, you know what I'm saying, I'll watch.
Okay.
I will say this. Big Naomi Osaka fan because I just find her just to be incredibly first of all, she's incredibly talented, but her post-game interviews are always very entertaining, as was the last one. So.
Yeah, that whole predicament, right? Man, I thought you were gonna go another route when you first started saying Naomi, but yeah, But anyways, yeah. What do you think about her walkout, by the way, with the whole attire thing?
With the attire thing?
Yeah.
Bro, I don't want to sidetrack the show, but tennis is like one of those weird, not weird, but one of those sports where they're kind of stuck in like a tradition, quote unquote, like a
Like
old
baseball.
school mentality. Yeah. And bro, it's 2026. You got to evolve with the times. That's kind of my thought there.
And coming from the tennis expert CJ Vogel, what'd you think?
Look, I mean, that kind of goes to the whole, feel good, play good, right? Look
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
do whatever it is, right? So I don't blame him. I mean, look, if that's what you want to wear it. And get with the times. If you're the sport, if you don't like it, beat it.
Yeah, I respect that. And so, yeah, like you said, you didn't want to sidetrack the show. I just like talking to the bros. I forget that we have a show sometimes. But yeah, we got y'all together just because I want to talk about the Texas transfer portal. It's officially not over yet, correctly, right, CJ? It's not technically over when it comes to guys that could still commit.
That is correct. There
Okay.
still could be signings, still could be additions. It could go all the way up until basically the end of the semester for the grad transfer window as well.
But yeah, we did want to wait until the entry portal was closed, which I believe closed last week. And so now Texas actually just got a commit or a signing yesterday, interior offensive lineman from Western Kentucky. And so I just want to just kind of get a recap, thoughts about how Texas did in y'all's opinion. Also just wanted to share my own thoughts about how everything went down. And I believe about 25 outgoing transfers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 18 incoming transfers for the Longhorns. And so more went out than came in. Just from those numbers specifically, I know, CJ, you talked about this a multitude of times on multiple platforms about why you feel like Texas philosophy has changed when it comes to the portal. So if you want to share your thoughts on why you feel like it was more outgoing than incoming transfers within this portal window.
Yeah, look, I think, with scholarships raising to 105, it makes sense to fill all 105. Yet, as we heard Sark say down in Orlando, it's not feasible for your dollar to stretch all of those 105 scholarships, especially if you're going after the top 5 stars and portal transfers, right? Those are going to be high money commodities. So for me, and with the way that the portal at least started, you look at it and you say, well, Texas is up to the mid-20s when it comes to departures. Texas is losing however many players to the NFL draft or graduation. There's a lot of attrition, it feels like, and, there is, right? There's going to be a lot of turnover year in and year out. But with the way that Texas has pursued its portal, imports is, hey, we're going for either high dollar and immediate impact, all conference level guys, or we're getting depth pieces who may not see the field immediately, but we know won't necessarily impact our bottom line. For me, it's just, hey, if you're Steve Sarkisian, if you're Brandon Harris, why try to pay 85 to 100 guys when you could say, hey, let's spin that down to about 70 put a lot of our money in the top 40, the top 45, top 50 even, and then just try to get depth and development all the way back up until you're 85. And then, hey, if walk-ons disappear, you have 20 extra spots there that you could fill for guys that are local, love Texas, and just want to have a jersey to try to earn a spot like a Michael Taff. Whereas you're still going after the Derek Williamses of the world or the Andrew Makubas and the high-profile guys at the same position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like that tactic is smart when you have Arch Manning at quarterback, right? When you're in like a win now mode. But I'm thinking for years to come, and Eric, you can chime in here as well. Like, is this feasible for a Longhorn team who may not always be on a win now type of situation? And I guess that's your mindset as a Texas Longhorn I don't want to say organization, but just like school. Like your mindset is to win a championship every year. But let's be realistic. After next season, you got to bring in maybe a KJ Lacey. You got to bring in a Dia Bell. And so are you really in that win now mode compared to, let's say, this year when you have Arch Manning returning with multiple guys on offense and multiple guys on the offensive line? Like, I just don't think this is something that is going to be feasible for the long term. I just think this is for a good, small, like, percentage of time, like, right now. And, like, Eric, what do you think about that? Do you think this is, like, something that Texas can do for years to come, or is this just because we have Arch Manning in his senior year, we need to go all in?
Well, Corey, I mean, I think you used the right word when you said organization, right? Let's not try and right? Like, I mean, you used the right word when you said organization.
Yeah, okay. You know what I'm saying? I just didn't know.
Yeah, it's not to say about university, but it is an organization. The reason I led there is because, CJ may know this. Corey, I don't know if you know this or not. Do you know what team had the most roster turnover year over year from the 2024 season to 2025 season in the NFL? The New England Patriots.
Oh, I'm about to say Patriots. They had the most cap space. So that's what my guess was.
And the New England Patriots are obviously in the Super Bowl, right? My point there is, in today's college football space, you have to get used to roster turnover. You cannot, the days of, oh man, we recruited, Joe Johnson from the time he was a sophomore, and I remember his recruitment, and then I watched him all the way through senior day. Like, those days are just done, right? You have to get used to roster turnover. So to your question, right, like, is this sustainable? Sure, there is an aspect of it that is, we have Arch Manning under the, I guess, equivalent of a rookie deal for a rookie NFL quarterback because of the fact that he is willing to give back, or I should say give back, but take a reduction in what he would take from the rev share, right? So that is kind of the equivalency there. But at the same point in time, like, Texas is always going to be trying to compete for a national title. Maybe the emphasis is just higher now because you have Arch Manning. But to the overall question, I think CJ, touched on a lot of great points there. Yeah, I didn't find the fact that Texas lost a higher number than, quote unquote, they brought in to be concerning. That's just the nature of roster management. You're going to have some guys who, whether they didn't necessarily like what their negotiation was as far as what they were going to get as far as rev share and NIL, that may cause them to go, i.e. Leonga Lafau, Bo Barnes, et cetera, Contrarian Wisner, right? You're going to have some guys where it's trimming of the fat, quote unquote, i.e. Daniel Cruz and others. And then you're going to have some guys who maybe you wanted to have come back, Parker Livingstone, for example, that just chose to go elsewhere, right? That's just the roster management in college football. So for me, and like I said, CJ touched on it, I think the model for Texas is never going to fill, and I don't think many schools are going to fill all 105 scholarships. The finances just aren't really there. It's a matter of looking at your roster every year and saying, okay, our entire roster, they're all free agents, right? Now, from this, who do we want to prioritize, which is probably going to be your 2D, right? CJ said, I think he said like 60 guys, probably 60 is probably a good number, but you can even shrink it down a little bit and say, as far as guys we're going to prioritize, paying our 2D, and then the rest, we're going to fill this out like we would in free agency and in the draft. That's what you have.
See, you mentioned a lot of guys that going out. So I just want to ask y'all this question. What is one guy? Give me one guy you're like, man, if he would have stayed on this roster, it would have been cool. Or, or maybe someone like, for my guy, it would be Christian Clark. Like, I felt like Christian was finally coming to his own. Ever since last spring, I like the way he just moved on the field. You could tell that he was going to become someone that could rush for over 100 yards in a bowl game, and I felt like he would have stayed another year. who knows, he would have had the starting spot after next season. But I understand why you have to leave. But that's probably like my guy I wish would have stayed in the program just to see what he would have become as a Longhorn. So do y'all have like one guy that left that you're like, man, I wish he would have still been a burnt orange?
Well, shoot, there was probably what 4 that left immediately. Where you're like, hold on, this is a surprise, right?
Yeah.
Leonga left, you DeAndre Moore, Trey Wisner, Livingston, of course, and you're sitting there saying, hey, and the history of college football, those guys are remembered forever by that fan base, by the Texas fan base, because they stuck it out and contributed for multiple years. But the one guy, and Eric, I know that everybody leaves for their own reason and whatnot. The one guy that I think we got just a small glimpse of, and I sit there and say, man, that would have been fun to have watched his development and evolution as a football player, was Bo Barnes. We got a little taste of it against Michigan in the Citrus Bowl. And, of course, at 6'3", 235, 40 pounds, whatever it is, and running a 10.9 out of high school, that's a toolsy kid. And we saw just only a little bit of it. So that's unfortunate for me.
Yeah, I'm going to go a different direction because I think Bo Barnes was that guy. Either a Bo Barnes or a Christian Clark was that guy for a lot of Texas fan base. So I'm going to spin it in a different direction. And if, CJ's obviously in this space, Corey, you also cover this team. If you guys have thoughts, I definitely would love to hear them. Contravian Wisner, and here's why I raise his name, right?
Okay.
Guys, I just spent 5 minutes talking about looking at roster management like it's the NFL, but these are still 17 through 24-year-olds, right? I would love to ask Steve Sarkisian, like, do 17 through 24-year-olds understand the business? Because we see whole grown adults who get salty about the business, right? To CJ's point, Contravian Wisner won you the game versus your rival, Texas A&M, or one of your rivals, back-to-back years. The guy who Steve Sarkisian always said, Trey Wisner is the example of a guy who stuck it out and started on special teams and earned his spot, right? We're not inside the building at Moncrief, but I'm going to assume that if we were, we would have been in meetings and we would have seen Contravian Wisner point to and saying, hey, that's the guy you should model yourself after because of how he carries himself and the way he goes about his business. If Trey Wisner wasn't quote unquote rewarded financially for performing, I do genuinely wonder how that plays inside the building. And again, I'm not saying that Hollywood Smothers or Raleek Brown aren't upgrades, because quite frankly, I think, especially Raleek Brown, I think he is an upgrade in terms of, kind of short area quickness and giving you some of the bursts that Jaden Blue gave the offense, just without fumbling a few years back, right? But just from a mental perspective, I wonder how that loss goes over with the guys in the locker room. I do genuinely wonder that.
Man, that's a great question, Eric, because that's a good point. It's all about the culture. And you talk about the pros, you talk about this being the business, but the thing that you always hear about with the pros is that, man, this culture is great. Think about the Chiefs culture. Think about the New England Patriots culture that Mike Vrabel was able to bring back in his first year and see what he's doing with the New England Patriots this year and going to a Super Bowl. And so the culture does mean something. And so having a guy who is the foundation of the culture, like you mentioned, we heard it all the time. Trey is the guy. Trey is the electricity in the huddle. Like, Trey is the Energizer Bunny. And so why not reward or even maybe boost a little bit of the offer just because of what he brings intangible wise, not production on the field per se, but he's the glue to the locker room. And so now you got to find another guy to step up and fill that role where some guys just may not be that type of person to do so. And so I totally agree with that. That's a great point you just made. And so with that being said, by the way, CJ, thought you were going to say Trey. Trey's your guy.
Trey is my guy.
Yeah.
It's upsetting that, and I mentioned Trey among 3 others. Those guys, I think, were big time pieces of your culture and big time pieces of your locker room. And again, that's part of the puzzle that you now have to construct if you're Steve Sarkisian or the position coaches or anybody involved in the strength and conditioning for this winter for 2026, is to get and kind of pull out the leadership from guys that did not have leadership roles a year ago. When you had a Trey Wisner, things were much easier. When you had a DeAndre Moore, who was the first at practice every single day, it was much easier. Who are going to be those guys? And I think, again, leaving Orlando and hearing Colin Simmons speak the way that he spoke about what he means to this program and university, and hearing Steve Sarkisian say, hey, Ty Anthony Smith was probably the leader in the linebacking room. That was a surprise to me.
Yeah, right? What y'all think about that, by the way?
That was a surprise, but it's a healthy surprise in the sense that there's continual evolution in those rooms, that someone will always step up and kind of command the respect of the younger guys or whoever else is in that locker room.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of random when Sark said that. I'm like, so what has Anthony been doing these last 2 months? Like, that's what I've been thinking. I'm like, had he really just checked out? Like, I know he got hurt toward the end of the year. And so, like, did he really step away a little bit and let Ty Anthony lead? And also, where was Leonga during that time? And so, Eric, when you heard that, by the way, I know it's a quick side note, but, like, what'd you think when Sark said that?
To be honest, I thought that was Steve Sarkisian maybe projecting towards 2026, right?
Okay.
Because, and I hate to put it this way, but at this point, Young LaFaus left the program. Anthony Hill is not walking through that door anymore, right? At that point, what are you trying to do? You're trying to set the table for 2026. I'm not saying it's not true, because all we've heard is that Ty Anthony Smith, to go back to, we talked about, CJ has a great relationship with Trey Wisner. That's the way that Steve was speaking about Ty Anthony Smith is the way Steve spoke about Trey Wisner. He's done everything right. He's, really working hard to, work on his body and doing all the things to give himself an opportunity to be a player on the roster. So I'm not saying I took it with a grain of salt, but I took it more as this is me setting the table for 2026 while also just boosting up a guy that you know is going to be there because the other two guys aren't walking through that door anymore.
Yeah.
Well, there'll be a lot of new guys walking through the door now after this portal window. So I just want to ask you, who's y'all's favorite player that Texas picked up from the portal?
Man. I mean, how do you not start with Cam Coleman?
Of course. I should have said like other than Cam, but you're right. Yeah, talk your stuff though.
Well, no, I think what he does is he gives you a bona fide superstar at the wide receiver spot. And I think we all agree there's talent with Ryan Wingo. There's just got to be more consistency, right? We like what Emmett Mosley saw, but we only saw him for half of a year. But you add a guy who for 2 years has been in the conversation to be a 2027 first-round pick from the minute he stepped foot on campus at Auburn, that makes a difference, right? He's one of the better contested catches players, wide receivers in all of the country. He was 9 of 11 on passes 20-plus yards down the field on contested catches. So that's something that if you're Arch Manning, how do you look at him and just say, hey, yeah, just go deep. We'll get you the ball. Oh, and by the way, I can actually get you the ball. It's a perfect marriage for both sides. And it's impossible to look at Cam Coleman and say, yeah, that guy won't have a fun, solid season under Steve Sarkisian's offense.
Yeah, it's funny because I got laugh when CJ said, yeah, I can actually get you the ball, because that's certainly a situation he's dealing with coming off of what he was last year at Auburn, or last 2 years. I'm going to go with Raleek Brown. I was torn between Rasheem Biles. I think he's a stud. I think he makes plays behind the line of scrimmage. Bo Masco, a kid out of CJ's favorite high school neck of the woods now, Kissimmee, Florida. It's a bit of an inside joke. CJ saw the high school facilities at Kissimmee and was like, yeah, is this a junior high facility here? No, as far as Raleek Brown, the thing that I like that he brings, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. This is no shade to Trey Wisner. Yeah, Trey Wisner runs physical, runs tough. And I think, all things considered, if the offensive line had been better, Trey's performance certainly would have been better, right? But what I like that Raleek Brown brings is the ability to force missed tackles. When we spoke with Trey Wisner entering this year, he said one of the things he wanted to work on was forcing missed tackles, obviously for a litany of reasons, being banged up a little bit, the offensive line, et cetera, getting in rhythm. As a runner, he didn't probably have the year he would have liked doing so. Raleek Brown gives you that, again, short area quickness. Guys, as people who cover this team, how many times did you see in 2023 and 2024, when Steve Sarkisian wanted to kind of call that quick screen, that bubble screen, it wasn't just to Xavier Worthy or to insert receiver, right? A lot of times it would be to a Jaden Blue, right? Or kind of the swing out of the backfield to a back, right? That if you get him with the ball in space, can make a guy miss. I think Raleek Brown brings that aspect in a way that CJ Baxter and Quintravian Wisner, quite frankly, just didn't to the offense. So from an offense perspective, really high on him. And also the two G5 linemen, I guess one former G5 lineman in Melvin Siani and now in Lawrence Seymour. I have a little bit of insight to those guys, and I'm pretty intrigued to see what they can do in Austin.
Curious, what's your insight there? What you know about those two offensive linemen? I know everyone out on Twitter, they were just waiting for an interior offensive lineman to get signed. You would think that Texas signed nobody if you watch Texas fans Twitter when it comes to their transfer portal window, except for yesterday. Everyone just seemed so excited after they got Seymour. So what is your thoughts on the kind of new offensive line, and I'll give my favorite player.
Yeah, I'll be super quick because I know you got plenty to cover. With Melvin Siani, I reached out to, so Siani was at Wake Forest last year, but began his career at Temple in the American. I reached out to a friend of mine. He is a director of player personnel at a AAC school. And he said, like, no, that kid, we played against him twice. He's got all the tools to play at the SEC. Basically said that he's not sure what he weighs at now because, of course, he spent last year in the ACC. But from when they faced him, thinks he has all the tools. Remember, Siani's Canadian, right? So that I know that sounds like I'm making a joke, but you play high school football in Canada, you're almost like a leg behind in terms of your recruitment, right? So that's how you end up kind of at that space. Seymour is someone who played at Western Kentucky. I have a relationship with Tyson Helton, who is Western Kentucky's head coach. Going to reach out to him. That conversation might not be as pleasant as it was when he was more than happy to boost up Kenny Baker. When Kenny Baker got to Austin, that conversation might not be as pleasant. But also have a relationship with Seymour's offensive line coach at Akron, Joel Rodriguez. So I'm going to reach out to those two guys because basically what I've heard from some of the Conference USA coaches who coached against Lawrence Seymour is that, again, he's got all the physical tools in terms of, or I should, excuse me, all of the technique in terms of playing at the Power 5 level, Power 4 level, but he's a little small, right? I remember him when he came to Miami Central, which is a really big high school down in South Florida, about 6'1", right? And that's not ideal guard size, 6'1", 280. That's more like center-ish size. I think that hurt him in his recruitment.
Yeah, it's not the big humans that Sark was always big on when it comes to recruiting the offensive line. I am curious to know how this all shapes out with the O-line, though, because, of course, Brandon Baker is probably going to move the guard, which I think is a good spot. Then you put Seymour at the left guard, Robertson at the center, and then Gooseby and, of course, Siani on the outside. But the one name that comes to my mind is Kojo. Where does he fit in all of this, right? Because, I mean, technically, from what I was hearing, he was leading that battle between him and Brandon Baker before he got hurt. And so how does he kind of put his name into the hat? Does he have a shot at this tackle spot? Will he get a shot at the guard spot? Kyle Flood likes to cross-pollinate when it comes to the different positions. And so, yeah, I'm just curious about Kojo. We'll see what happens with that. But my favorite player from the portal, talking about guys you can move around, Bo Masco. You mentioned him, Eric, a little bit ago, but I'm intrigued with Bo just because, of course, he has the experience on the outside, but more so how they use him. And then flip side of it, how do you use Grayson Littleton? Because my question is, do you move Grayson outside? Well, is that why you brought Bo in so you don't have to move Grayson outside? You can keep him at the star. Or do you try to move them in and out? Or do you move Cade somewhere? And so I am intrigued with the whole secondary as a whole, just because I think Grayson can play outside. I think he can make that switch just like Ilbo did, just like Jade Barron did. But maybe they wanted to keep Grayson at the star because they don't have anybody depth-wise that they can trust at that star position as much as they trust Grayson. And so Bo Masco, to me, I think shores up that corner star spot, and I think that's why I like Bo as one of my favorite guys out the portal. And then, of course, on the back end, here's my next question to y'all. When it comes to guys that Texas retained, getting Derek Williams back was a huge plus for me. Of course, Jelani not entering the draft was also a big boost to that secondary. I was honestly nervous with Jelani because, to me, if Jelani would have declared, he would have shined at the combine. Like, I think that's a situation where he would have been those guys that hops up 2 or 3 rounds just because of all the stuff that he would have put on film at that event. So, yeah, I'm curious to know, guys that Texas retained, who do you feel like was kind of the most important guys that they brought back?
How do you not start with Jelani?
Yeah.
I mean, I talked to folks up in Waco who said, yeah, he's probably a mid-round guy right now, kind of ranging into that 3 or 4 fourth-round picks. But no, he's going to be one of the big vocal leaders again that we go back to culture, leading by example, et cetera. But beyond that, the retention of Trevor Gooseby, who first team All SEC, he just underwent shoulder surgery according to the university as well. Did that play a role? But to get him back, you at least have a cornerstone of your offensive line who, I know the 3 of us have talked about it off air. If Texas doesn't figure that out, or if they don't get the pieces out of the portal, it doesn't matter how much talent they have elsewhere. So for him to come back and be that left tackle, the blindside protector of Arch Manning, I think that's as important as any addition that Texas made out of the portal or any retention battle that they won when it comes to keeping this roster intact for 2026.
Yeah, no, I think CJ hit the nail on the head on both of those guys. So I'll kind of pivot and go with Kobe Black.
Yeah.
Him returning to Austin. To me, that's intriguing because obviously he had, a rising, promising freshman year last year. I don't want to say he got lost in the shuffle, but, Cade Phillips emerged, right? They're kind of figuring out Jalen Grayson Littleton comes on, starts, no pun intended, starts at the star, right? So Kobe Black, I think, with Malik Muhammad gone, with Jalen Gilbo gone, kind of, I don't want to say the old guard, but some of those veterans now departing for the NFL, I think there's more room for Kobe Black to kind of ascend and maybe reclaim a little bit of that momentum he had from his freshman year.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, man. That DB room is packed. You see, Dave, you about to say something?
No, I like that pick a lot.
Yeah, that DB room is going to be very exciting to see how they kind of, like I said, how they use everybody. And then now you got Gideon back, so that's big time plus. I think that was one of the biggest reasons why Derek Williams came back was because of his relationship with Gideon. And of course, Muschamp is going to be coaching the secondary, and so how do they use them? Kobe Black is a huge DB, so putting his hands on people, something that Muschamp likes DBs to do, that may be a plus for him. Bo Masco, like I said earlier, Grayson Littleton, you still got the Warren Robersons of the world. Or did he transfer out? No, he came back. Yeah. And so what happens with him? Wardell Mack. Where does he fit into all this after getting the pick in the bowl game? So yeah, a lot of different questions with the secondary. I'm excited to see how that all shapes out. And one of the last things I just wanted to talk about was we talked about the offensive line getting help. We talked about the running back room maybe being upgraded. We all know the wide receiver room's an upgrade. D-line, got a couple of D-linemen out the portal. Colin Simmons, of course, is going to be the guy next year. We mentioned Biles in the linebacker room coming in, pairing him with Anthony Smith. And the secondary we just raved about. Does this team have holes? Do y'all think there's any holes on this team? And if so, where's it at?
Oh, boy. I don't know where you're thinking, Eric. Corey, I know there's a long way until kickoff, and spring football will obviously be what I would assume be very light once again for Sark when it comes to physicality. But the unknown remains on the offensive line, and I think it starts with Lawrence Seymour, of course, still waiting for that waiver to be approved for his eligibility in 2026. Should he not be approved, hey, you're back to, I don't want to say square one, but you're back to where you were when you're kind of wondering, hey, do we have the pieces in place for this offensive line to take a leap forward, which I don't know how y'all feel about it, but coming into this portal window, it was, hey, figure out the offensive line and everything else can follow. But that offensive line had to be better. And if he, is not granted eligibility, you're kind of stuck. On top of that, how does a Kojo return from an ACL? Could Jaden Chapman be a piece here? Where's Jordan Coleman in his development? Do you have center depth? Offensive line, for me, there's a lot of pieces, but how do they fit right now in the grand scheme of things when trying to build that puzzle?
Eric, before you go, I did want to touch back on what CJ just said. When it comes to having to get Seymour here, can you explain a little bit for people like myself who really haven't done a lot of research on that? What is the situation with Seymour and having to try to bring him over to the 40? CJ?
Oh, my bad. I thought you asked Eric. That's on me. No. Look, he started his career at Miami. He redshirted in 2021. He played 6 games in 2022. 2023, he entered the transfer portal. So he was not on a roster anywhere. He was kind of lost in flux, right? Just kind of floating in space for 2023. Enrolls at Akron for 24. Plays at Western Kentucky in 2025. So his window to play 4 seasons in 5 years is up. However, because he wasn't on a roster or enrolled anywhere in 2023, he's saying, hold on, my 5 years to play 4 should be extended to include 2026 because I wasn't, on a roster or at a program anywhere at the time. So that's kind of the debate. Of course, the NCAA, who knows what they actually rule on and decide against. But right now, my belief is that Texas would not have gone out and taken Seymour if they didn't feel like there was more reason or not to suspect him on the field this fall.
That's very interesting because if he doesn't come, oh man, they are in a pickle, right? I mean, if that's the situation, then you really don't got no depth there at all, and so you barely got depth now. And one more thing before Eric, you go, because this is so, to me, like you said, it's the biggest question out the portal is this situation. And I think a lot of Texas fans watching from afar, those Michigan guys, they answered the portal. I guess y'all could both touch on this. Y'all heard anything? Was that the expectation? Like, was that kind of like yeah, we got these guys for sure. And once they didn't commit and come to Texas and went back to Michigan, everything kind of hit the fan. They just had to figure out something, and maybe they just had all their eggs in that basket. Is that true or no?
I think it's easy to point to them and say, hey, that was target 1A and 1B, right? And I don't want to call them a package deal, but if you grab two from the same offensive line, move them over. Well, we saw how it played out. Connor Robertson returned. You retain Trevor Gooseby. Brandon Baker still on roster. There's your starting five with Guarnero walking in and Sprague becoming your right tackle. So that to me was target 1A and 1B on the offensive line for the Texas offensive staff. Unfortunately, look, Kyle Whittingham's a heck of a coach, and just upping and leaving a place that you have called home for multiple years. It's not always easy, especially, if, finances are equal or similar or whatever you want to call it. Not saying that's the case, but look, some guys just prefer to be where they were. And of course, the new coach coming into Michigan, Whittingham, develops offensive linemen at a heck of a pace.
Yeah, crazy how they got that hired that late.
I'll combine both answers, Corey, with kind of thoughts on maybe a whole and the offensive line question. The reason I kind of laughed is because, we've heard this talked about as the Wild Wild West, right? In terms of the transfer portal and whatnot. Guys, you guys don't have to agree with this. I don't want to put him on the spot. This is my personal feelings. We have no reason to believe that players aren't using Texas as leverage to go get whatever it may be from either their current school or maybe another school. Here's why. Texas, as CJ talked about, right, had a very clear need entering the transfer portal window. They couldn't hide it. They need offensive linemen. So if I am not saying if I'm a 22-year-old offensive lineman, if I'm the agent of a 22-year-old offensive lineman, and this is purely business, just business, we're going to go to Texas and say, all right, yeah, we're going to take these visits and whatnot. And it wouldn't surprise me. Again, I'm not reporting this. I'm just painting a picture. If one of these offensive linemen visited Texas and said, hey, the going rate for me is $3 million. And Steve Sarkisian's like, whoa, wait, how did that become the going rate? The going rate is what we can get out of you, and you've already demonstrated a clear need, right? So it's either you have Texas by the proverbial, jewels, or you go back to your school and say, hey, I think I can get X from Texas, whether that's true or not. But really, this is where I want to be, and you can negotiate a better deal for yourself. That's how I feel about several of the players who may have visited Texas who didn't end up joining the program. So that's just my thought there, in addition to what CJ said, which is also a great answer. Now, in terms of I'll be super quick. I'm just going to answer your question as far as the whole, Corey.
Yeah,
I think depth overall. CJ talked about the depth on the offensive line. Depth overall, right? You saw the teams who managed to make it deep into the college football playoff. They were able to play a roster well beyond their 2 deep. I think that's going to be a question for Texas, not at every spot, but at various spots. And I don't want to speak this into existence, but knock on wood, remember, Arch Manning was the first quarterback in the Steve Sarkisian era to start every single game, right? Can he do that again? And the hope is he doesn't get beat up the way he did last year, but can he do that again? So depth across the teams, my question mark, my hope.
That's a good point there. And that's why Sark has been getting these backup quarterbacks that have a lot of experience for moments like you had last year with Caldwell. And so we'll see who this QB that came in. I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head. But
MJ Morris.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's why y'all are the best. That's why y'all the best. But yes, for MJ, that's why you bring him in, right? For those moments, hopefully, when Arch may, hopefully not, but may have to leave the game or may not start a game. And so you brought up a point, though, about using Texas as leverage. And we kind of saw that a little bit on the flip side with Texas players going to the portal and coming back. And this, as we try to wrap things up here, but do y'all think that's kind of like, well, two-part question. Do you think that's kind of new regime of the transfer portal since it is a Wild Wild West and you got dudes from like Ole Miss taking guys that are already signed contracts from Clemson and bringing them over to campus? Is that kind of the new norm? And also, what y'all think about Sark kind of double backing on what he said a year or two ago about if you leave Texas for the portal, you can't come back? Is that just him adapting and not dying with the times?
I mean, you have to adapt with the times, and we're seeing the best example of adapting to the times is Dabo Swinney taking portal kids, right? But no, to keep it with Texas, I think maybe even some of the guys, some of the names, some of the numbers that we saw enter the portal, I think at a point kind of hit Sark and the staff and said, well, okay, we got to retain some of these guys. And I know, to your point, Eric, some of that is, do they think they can get a higher dollar amount than what's being offered? And the best way to raise demand there is to say, hey, I'm leaving. And they're, you're just hearing the cash register go cha-ching whenever that happens, right? So, no, I like the evolution of Sark saying, hey, hold on, we see a fit for you, let's make it work. And of course, a lot of that happened on the defensive side of the ball where a new defensive coordinator comes in. And now you got to see where you fit on that side of the football, where you fit in his scheme, personnel department, etc. But altogether, if you stay stagnant, if you keep doing things year in and year out, you're going to fall behind in this portal world. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's, again, we're seeing things now, hearing things now that 5 years ago we would have thought was putting coaches in jail, right? Because of how crazy all of this portal world has just evolved and how quickly it's all kind of gone downhill in my eyes.
Yeah.
And CJ mentions 5 years ago. The portal changes from 5 days ago to now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought it was ridiculous. And maybe that's just, fans of other opposing, OU fans or whatnot, or whoever may be, want to give Steve Sarkisian a hard time. Maybe it's just fun to bash Texas. I don't know. Come on. That's silly. I can't add more to what CJ said because he hit the nail on the head in terms of the evolution of the portal. So I'm just going to give this perspective, which I wrote in an article a while back. Those of us who are around Texas, around Steve Sarkisian, know there's two people. There's Coach Sark, who has spent the better part of the last quarter century, last 26 years as a coach. And there's Steve Sarkisian. Steve Sarkisian is a football player at heart. And let's remember where Steve Sarkisian made those comments about, if you enter the portal, we say thanks, but we're moving on. That was on the pivot with Ryan Clark, with Fred Taylor, with Channing Crowder. Steve Sarkisian, that wasn't Coach Sark talking. That was Steve Sarkisian, the football player, talking and chopping up a couple ex-football players. That's not the line that Coach Sark should be held to in 2025, 2026, right? Coach Sark has to understand that, this thing evolves. So, I guess that context for me is key to know, because it's key to provide, because if you've dealt with Steve Sarkisian, the guy who, and forgive me, I don't want to misquote it, but he said it with Craig Way on the postgame show when they beat Michigan, right? CJ, I don't know if you saw the quote, it was fun to beat OU's ass, I think he said, and fun to beat, so on and so forth. That's Steve Sarkisian pumped up after the game. The guy we get is Coach Sark, right? So you got to delineate between the two. Exactly. Buttoned up, CJ.
Two different sides, two different sides of Sark. And to be honest, man, that Coach Sark, even though he does a really good job, it's funny, and this is such a sidetrack, but it's just came to my mind. I was listening to one of those sports shows today about Joe Brady getting hired as a Bills head coach, and his biggest thing was proving why he can be the CEO of the Bills organization and not just the OC, and his time in Carolina where it kind of fell flat. And I just thought to myself, it's crazy that Steve's already doing that. They're trying to see if Joe Brady, about to be an NFL head coach, can be a CEO. But a guy like Sarkisian is already the CEO, and he's already playing that role. And that's why I feel like the rumors of him going to the league always make sense, because he's already doing what some of these GMs and owners are looking for at the pro level. Because it's different, bro. It's hard. It's hard to play coach, play caller, CEO all in one. But I will say, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Sark does a really good job at that. I feel he's pretty good at the podium. I think he relates to the players pretty well. And of course, when it comes to just bringing up the Texas brand, we saw him go on that world tour, trying to make sure they got into the playoffs. He does pretty well with media. So props to Sark for that. And having two different code switching, I guess you could say. That's basically what that is when it comes to Coach Sark and Steve Sarkisian. But before we get closed out, last question for y'all, then we can wrap this thing up. Who do y'all think won the portal? Just out the entire country, what team in college football you feel like won the portal?
It's a heck of a question. The first team, and this might sound a little crazy, I'll give a team on Texas's roster or schedule and one that's not. The first that come to mind for me is I thought Kentucky did a hell of a job out of the portal. And that's not a team that you'd typically consider to be amongst the elite in college football. I understand that. But new coach coming in, they had a plethora of money coming in. They grabbed a number of really talented players, Bo Barnes. I mean, I'm excited to see what he's able to do there.
C.J. Baxter up there.
C.J. Baxter, thank you. And then on Texas' schedule, how do you not look at LSU and just say, oh boy, Lane's going to do it again, right? That's going to be a tough team to beat moving forward, especially this year when you have to go to Death Valley.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to pin it down to one because I think it all depends on what you kind of were looking for. I think a lot of the teams that CJ said, I think LSU did a hell of a job. I think Colorado and Coach Prime, I think they did a solid job. I mean, still some holes there. They did a solid job. Kentucky, most definitely. I think Miami, if they can land a quarterback, which it seems they're on the verge of landing a quarterback, I think they'll have done an excellent job. Indiana as well. And I put Texas in that realm also.
Yeah, I agree. All those answers. I really don't have another answer outside. I was going to take Colorado, but you just mentioned that because DeAndre Moore Jr. going over there, but Scudero's just like he's the guy I wanted Texas to kind of go after. Not lie to you. We saw him in person. He's a dude. Like he's legit a dude. And I think pairing him in that system with Marion, as we all know, Marion has a great offensive mind, and so we'll see how he utilizes all those weapons. And then with Indiana, like you mentioned, I really like Josh Hoover. I don't know if people are talking enough about this kid, but let's not forget, Texas would have lost that game against Josh Hoover if it wasn't for Adonai Mitchell's catch down the sideline. And so I like his ability to escape. He moves well outside the pocket, more so than Mendoza. Now, the question is he as smart as Mendoza? Does he have the arm talent? But I think he's able to do a little bit more with his legs. So I'm interested to see how that offense kind of evolves with Hoover as a quarterback and not Mendoza. But, yeah, I think Indiana was another great fit. I'm surprised C.J. didn't go there, by the way. I thought C.J. would go to Indiana or Kentucky, but I don't know how much money they were all offering. But that's a whole nother story for another day. But, guys, thank y'all for the time. Really appreciate it. Eric Henry, C.J. Vogel. Eric, where can people read your articles at?
Yeah, you can find my work at Eric C. Henry _ on Twitter, covering Texas football, basketball, baseball, seemingly every sport on the 40 acres, but there at Eric C. Henry _ and of course at Horns 24/7 on all socials.
And CJ Vogel, you already know, he's everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, it don't matter. He probably got a Threads. I don't know. But where can people find your work, CJ?
Threads, Blue Sky, they're all the same, right? But no, I'm over at Twitter at CJ Vogel _ OTF and at ontexasfootball.com. Fortunately, we get to quiet it down on my side, Eric, so I'm excited to see what you got for basketball, baseball, and the rest.
Wow, no recruiting stuff, CJ, right now?
Recruit never ends.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I feel like that's 24/7 for y'all. You see what I did there? Hey, bro. Hey, I'm just, I'm saying, off the dome with it. But, yo, appreciate the time. Thank y'all for watching Mose Knows. If you're watching on Apple Music, heck, Spotify, YouTube, it don't matter. TikTok, I appreciate it. Y'all could watch anything. Y'all could listen to anything, but y'all listen to this. So, appreciate the time. Appreciate Eric, CJ for joining me today. And I just hope everyone has a sensational day. And let's see what happens with Texas football as the season comes up. A lot of new faces on the 40. A lot of exciting faces to learn and get to know, and I can't wait to see what Arch Manning and the crew is able to accomplish.